The initial winter chill of December has a way of making Portland feel compact and insignificant. The clouds press down low against the skyline. The breeze carries hints of car exhaust mixed with damp concrete. And suddenly, every shop window becomes adorned with sparkles, as though the entire city conspires to persuade you that warmth and safety surround you. That particular afternoon, I stepped out of the medical center where I handle administrative duties, my identification badge still swaying against my jacket, and I could already sense the seasonal tension building inside my ribcage. Not the enjoyable variety, the kind that makes your shoulder muscles contract before anything has actually occurred. My vehicle sat at the distant corner of the parking structure, where the overhead lights flicker as though they share my exhaustion. I can still recall the sound my heels made against the frozen ground, the way my exhaled breath formed small clouds before vanishing into nothing, and how my fingers struggled with my car keys because the cold had numbed them completely. I had made myself a promise to approach this season with simplicity. I would purchase a few things, rest when possible, and perhaps for once avoid spending the entire month preparing myself for the weight of someone else's demands. My phone started ringing when I was midway to my vehicle, the display illuminated with Father. Just that single word. No heart symbol, no cheerful photograph, merely 6 letters that somehow contained the entirety of my upbringing. I stopped mid-stride. I did not consciously decide to halt. My body simply froze the way it habitually did whenever he reached out, as though I remained that young girl anticipating whether I was about to receive approval or criticism. I gazed at the name glowing on my screen for a moment longer than necessary. Then I picked up because that was my perpetual response. His voice transmitted sharp and distinct, as though he was already deep in discussion. He did not inquire about my day. He did not ask whether I was behind the wheel, whether I had a spare moment, whether exhaustion weighed on me. He proceeded directly to his agenda. Marlo, the holiday gathering happens at my residence this year. 30 family members are expected. I require you to prepare all the food, maintain the house, and attend to guests throughout the entire day. Everything must be flawless. A brief pause followed, just sufficient for him to inhale, as though he had presented me with a shopping inventory and anticipated I would begin reading it back immediately. In that instant, I experienced something within me perform a small, quiet rupture. Not a theatrical collapse, not a cinematic scene where a woman marches off into the snowfall. It was more like a thread that had been stretched taut across years finally surrendering. I reflected on the years I had invested attempting to ensure holidays proceeded without incident for him, attempting to enhance his reputation, attempting to make everyone feel at ease while I consumed my own fatigue as though it were standard practice. If you are hearing this story right now, I need to pose a question. What are you occupied with as you absorb these words? For me, I was planted in an icy parking structure following my shift, keys gripped in my palm, staring at my automobile as though it might rescue me. Meanwhile, my father calmly delegated another holiday season I never consented to. He continued speaking as though my lack of response constituted agreement. He desired it to be sophisticated. Those were his precise words. Sophisticated, not uncomplicated, not intimate, not a communal meal where everyone contributes something and shares laughter about the imperfections. Sophisticated like a magazine feature, as though he believed the appropriate table arrangement could conceal the fractures running through our family. Ensure the food is exceptional, he instructed. Nothing mediocre. People are making journeys. They anticipate something remarkable. I could detect the faint murmur of a television playing in the background on his end, as though he was reclining while he organized my obligations. I could envision him in his favorite chair, shoulders at ease, remote control in his grip, already imagining praise flowing in his direction. He did not express gratitude. He did not say I would appreciate it. He did not phrase it as a question. He stated, "I require you to handle this." My throat constricted. Part of me wanted to challenge him. I possessed so many responses prepared, stacked like containers in storage. I maintain full-time employment. I am depleted. I cannot sacrifice my personal days merely to orchestrate your celebration. Why are you summoning 30 individuals without consulting me? Why do you perpetually presume I will comply? But I understood how that exchange would unfold. Father would become silent in that particular manner he has, the manner that indicates you are moments away from being categorized as problematic. He would claim I was exaggerating something insignificant. He would declare that relatives support one another. He would mention that mother would be let down by my behavior. Mother. Even following her passing, he continued wielding her memory as leverage. I swallowed my objections. I felt my jaw tense, my fingers wrapping around my keys with such force they carved into my flesh. Then I heard myself respond, in a voice that seemed to belong to someone more courageous than myself. Certainly, Father. He produced a satisfied sound, as though the matter was resolved. Excellent. I will see you this weekend. We will review the menu together. He disconnected first. I remained motionless for several seconds. The wind pressed against my jacket. Somewhere across the lot, a shopping cart enclosure rattled like an unsecured cage. I stared at my phone, then at the dark glass of my windshield, and I thought to myself, no, we will not be reviewing any menu. Not this season. I climbed into my car and sat there with my hands positioned on the steering wheel, not engaging the ignition. My thoughts began revisiting the previous several holiday seasons. There was the year Father demanded prime rib and an elaborate dessert arrangement as though we were hosting a wedding reception. He contributed nothing financially. I covered everything. I remember standing at the grocery checkout with a cart overflowing with provisions, observing the total climb higher and higher, convincing myself it was acceptable because this was family. There was the year he determined we required specialty cheeses and imported crackers because his cousin from another state was attending. I listened to him elaborate on how a proper host never compromises on quality, then watched him walk away while I produced my payment card. And then there was the wine situation. I can still visualize it as though it is occurring in this very moment. We were inside a liquor establishment, and Father was in excellent spirits that day, exchanging pleasantries with the cashier as though he owned the establishment. He noticed a collection of bottles displayed behind glass panels, the variety with individual spotlights illuminating them. He gestured like a child discovering a prize. Those bottles. We are purchasing those. I laughed because I assumed he was being humorous. Then I examined the price and my stomach plummeted. $800 each. He selected 3. I remember leaning close to him and murmuring, "Father, that totals $2,400. He did not even hesitate. He responded, "It is the holiday season. People will value it. You will manage it." And I did. I managed it. I managed the expense, the cooking, the cleaning, the organizing, the decorating, the serving, the smiling. I managed it so effectively that no one ever considered asking who was managing it. That is the aspect that consumes you. If you have ever been the individual who consistently intervenes, when you accomplish it without complaint, people begin believing it materializes through magic, as though meals appear simply because a holiday exists, as though the residence remains immaculate because that is the natural order, as though the person performing the labor never grows weary, never develops bitterness, never possesses their own existence. By the time I navigated home, the sky had already grown dim. Portland traffic crept past illuminated wreaths and inflatable holiday figures, and I felt as though I was observing everyone else inhabit a festive movie while I remained trapped in the production footage, hauling equipment and cleaning up after scenes. I reside alone in a modest apartment on the northern edge of the city. Nothing elaborate, just myself, a sofa that has witnessed better times, and a small coffee maker. When I entered, I removed my shoes and stood there momentarily, absorbing the silence. The silence was precisely what I had been yearning for. Not another gathering, not another performance. I placed my keys on the counter and gazed at the corner of my closet where my old travel bag rested. It was not glamorous. It bore scuff marks and a damaged zipper pull that I had repaired using a key ring. But observing it caused my pulse to decelerate, as though my body recognized the shape of escape before my conscious mind fully comprehended. I did not deliberate. I simply opened my closet, extracted the travel bag, and positioned it on my bed. The motion felt automatic, as though my hands had been awaiting permission for years. Then my phone vibrated once more. A message from Father. Do not forget 30 people. We must make an impression on them. Make an impression? The phrase made my jaw clench. Father behaved as though the purpose of the holiday was to earn validation from relatives we rarely encountered, as though their compliments held more value than my hours, my finances, my self-respect. I composed a reply, then erased it. I typed again, then deleted that response too. I could already anticipate his reaction, saturated with disappointment. I could hear how he would relay the story to the rest of the relatives. Marlo is being difficult. Marlo is overwhelmed. Marlo is being theatrical. I sat on the edge of my mattress and drew a deep breath. I thought about Mother for a moment, which still occurs when I reach a crossroads. Mother had been the quiet adhesive in our household, the one who smoothed every rough edge. She cooked because she genuinely wanted to, because she derived joy from nourishing people, but she also carried a melancholy I failed to comprehend as a child. Now I wonder how frequently her affection transformed into duty, and how often she suppressed her own needs the way I had been suppressing mine. I resolved that I was not going to vanish within my family. Not any longer. My phone vibrated again. Another message, this time from my Aunt Vivian. Your father mentioned you are handling the cooking. Thank you. You consistently make it memorable. I examined that message until my eyes burned. Thank you. But it was not genuine appreciation. It was relief. It was a transfer of responsibility. It was a courteous method of communicating. Excellent. You will bear this, so we do not have to. My friend Celeste called a few minutes afterward. She has known me since our university years, and she interprets me like a meteorological forecast. I did not even greet her normally. I simply said, "Father called." Celeste sighed. "What now?" I explained, and I heard my own voice as if it belonged to another person, itemizing the same familiar narrative. 30 relatives. Sophisticated. All day. Flawless. Celeste remained quiet for a beat. Then she asked, "Marlo, are you actually going to comply?" I opened my mouth to say of course. The word was right there, conditioned into me. But then I observed the travel bag on my bed and I heard myself voice something different. I do not believe I am capable. I do not believe I will. Celeste did not celebrate or applaud or treat it as something charming. She simply stated, "Good. Because you are depleted and you are financially drained from funding his vision of perfection. And he still addresses you as though you are his employee." Employee? That word struck hard, because it was accurate. I was not his collaborator in hosting. I was his unpaid assistant. After we concluded our conversation, I walked into my kitchen and opened my refrigerator. It was not vacant, but it was not stocked for 30 guests either. I observed the groceries I had acquired for myself, the simple items that sustain my weekly routine: yogurt, greens, a carton of eggs, remaining soup, an ordinary existence. I leaned against the counter and attempted to envision the coming week if I maintained this trajectory. I would be at the market every evening following work, directing money at ingredients Father demanded. I would sacrifice my weekend cleaning his residence, scrubbing floorboards, polishing surfaces, ensuring no one could accuse him of living like a typical human being. I would cook for hours while relatives occupied the living room and conversed over the sound of my labor. I would distribute plates, refill beverages, wipe surfaces, and maintain a smile until my facial muscles ached. And then I would drive home after it concluded, exhausted, perhaps slightly unwell, with my bank account diminished and my spirit heavier. I walked back into my bedroom and ran my palm over the travel bag. My thoughts kept attempting to frighten me into compliance. He will be furious. Your family will gossip. They will claim you destroyed the holiday. But another thought emerged, composed and resolute. If the holiday collapses because one individual refuses to be a servant, then it was never a family celebration. It was an arrangement. I sat down and began composing a mental inventory. Not a grocery inventory, but a boundaries inventory. What belonged to me? What did not belong to me? What had I been financing? What had I been supplying? What had I been surrendering as though it held no significance? I did not resolve everything in that instant. I did not know precisely how events would unfold. Who would support Father? Who would pretend not to observe? Who would suddenly remember I was a human being? But I understood one thing with absolute certainty. I was not going to stand in that kitchen this season pretending I was content, pretending my money and my hours were unlimited. I was going to halt the mechanism. I extracted a few garments and folded them into the travel bag. Not a complete packing yet, just sufficient to make it tangible. My hands trembled slightly at first, then steadied. I could sense my heartbeat in my throat, but beneath it was something else I had not experienced in a considerable time. Relief. My phone vibrated again, and I did not examine it immediately. I partially closed the travel bag, reclined on my bed, and permitted myself to stare at the ceiling for a quiet interval, allowing the reality to settle. A week before the holiday, my father called and informed me 30 relatives were arriving, and I was required to cook, clean, and serve throughout the day. Everything must be flawless. I responded certainly. Then I disconnected and commenced packing. I was not going to argue with him. I was going to depart. And for the first time in years, the thought of what would transpire next did not frighten me as much as it should have. It made me feel, in a manner I could barely articulate, as though my existence was finally about to belong to me again. That sensation did not materialize from nowhere. It had been accumulating quietly for years, stacking itself upon every holiday, every family function. Every instance I found myself standing in a kitchen that did not feel like mine, performing work no one else acknowledged. Once I began packing that evening, memories started surfacing on their own. Uninvited but impossible to dismiss. I did not become the family helper overnight. I became her gradually, one holiday season at a time. The first year it occurred, I barely registered it. Father had recently lost mother, and everyone was delicate in that careful manner people adopt when grief remains fresh. I volunteered to assist because it felt like the appropriate thing to do. I prepared a few dishes, cleaned up afterward, ensured Father did not feel isolated in his own residence. People expressed gratitude that year. They embraced me. They told me how resilient I was. I returned home exhausted but fulfilled, believing I had accomplished something meaningful. The second year, it was presumed. Father called a week before the holiday and informed me what time guests would arrive. He referenced the menu as though it was already determined. He said it would be simpler if I just managed it as I had previously. I remember hesitating on the phone, waiting for him to inquire if that was agreeable. He did not. I agreed anyway. That was the year he began employing the word elevated. The food should be elevated. The table should appear elevated. We want the atmosphere to feel special. Special, I discovered, meant more costly, more labor, more pressure. It never meant distributed responsibility. By the third year, my role had completely solidified. I was not a daughter providing assistance. I was the one who made the holiday function. People arrived and immediately inquired where to place their coats, where the beverages were located, what time dinner would be served. No one asked Father. He was occupied hosting, sitting in his chair, recounting stories, accepting praise for the ambiance. I convinced myself it was temporary, that once things stabilized, once everyone adjusted, it would balance out. That is what women like me consistently tell ourselves. We confuse endurance with virtue. The financial aspect crept in quietly as well. Initially, it was minor things. Father would request that I acquire a few additional items since I was already at the store. I would pay and assume he would reimburse me later. He never did, but it felt uncomfortable to mention it in front of relatives, so I released it. Then the lists grew lengthier. He wanted shrimp appetizers one year because someone from out of state enjoyed seafood. He wanted an elaborate dessert display another year because he had seen something online. He would present me suggestions like favors, not directives. But they invariably came with an expectation. If I hesitated, he would remind me that the holidays occur only once annually. I was not affluent. That is something I wish people understood. I worked full-time. I paid my own expenses, and I attempted to save when possible. I did not possess some concealed fortune that made these expenditures effortless. I simply had a profound aversion to public confrontation. I despised the notion of relatives whispering about me being frugal or difficult. I dreaded the thought of embarrassing Father in front of people he wished to impress. So I paid quietly, consistently, without protest. The year of the wine was when it crossed into something I could not overlook. We were at the liquor establishment together because Father insisted on selecting the bottles personally. He enjoyed the performance of it, conversing with staff, and behaving as though he was curating an experience. I followed him through the aisles, already preparing myself. When he paused in front of the locked display and pointed, I felt my stomach tighten. Those bottles were arranged like jewelry. Substantial glass, sophisticated labels, the variety of wine no one actually properly tastes during a boisterous family dinner. The employee unlocked the case and Father requested 3. Not 1, 3. When I quietly mentioned the price, he dismissed it. He said it was for the family. He said people would appreciate it. He said I would manage it. Not inquired, informed. At the register, the total appeared, and I remember feeling my face warm. The cashier observed me, waiting. Father had already stepped aside, conversing with someone he recognized. I produced my card and paid. The machine beeped, and just like that, almost $2,500 departed my account. No one thanked me for that wine. They praised Father for his taste. After that, it became standard for him to decide, and for me to finance it. He would suggest upgrades casually. Superior meat, superior accompaniments, superior beverages. He never stated he would pay. He never stated he would not. He simply assumed I would handle it. The same way he assumed I would handle the cooking and cleaning. What made it worse was how invisible it all was. People complimented the meal and looked at Father. They praised the atmosphere and thanked him for hosting. If anyone acknowledged me, it was typically with a comment about how organized I was, or how I always liked to stay occupied, as though this was my pastime, not my obligation. I did not correct them. I smiled. I continued moving. I told myself it did not matter who received credit, but it did matter. It mattered more than I wanted to acknowledge. I remember one January morning, a few weeks after the holiday, sitting at my small kitchen table with my laptop open. Snow was falling outside, slow and steady, and the apartment was quiet. I was reviewing my credit card statement the way I habitually did, attempting to plan for the year ahead. Line after line was labeled grocery store, specialty market, liquor store. The total at the bottom made my chest constrict. Thousands of dollars spent on family dinners. No reimbursement, no discussion, no acknowledgement. I stared at the screen and felt something close to panic rise up, not because I could not pay my expenses, but because I realized how easily this had become standard, how little space I possessed to decline without creating a scene. That was when I understood the genuine reason I continued paying. It was not generosity. It was avoidance. I was purchasing peace, or at least the illusion of it. I was paying to maintain smoothness, to keep Father proud, to keep relatives comfortable, and everyone else benefited from my silence. I attempted once to raise the issue. Not directly. I mentioned casually that the holidays had become expensive. Father dismissed it. He stated we should not calculate every expense among family. He said if I was struggling, I should simply communicate that, as though that was the problem. Not the expectation, not the assumption, merely my inability to maintain pace. I abandoned the conversation. I always abandoned it. As the years progressed, my role solidified even further. People began communicating their preferences to me. Someone preferred gluten-free desserts. Someone else did not consume red meat. They informed me, not Father, because they understood I was the one who made everything materialize. I noticed something else as well. Father never requested anyone else to contribute financially. Not my aunt, not my cousins, not even the relatives who flew in and stayed for days. The expense flowed in one direction, toward me, and no one questioned it because I did not. By the time this holiday season arrived, I was not merely expected to cook and clean. I was expected to bankroll the entire production. Standing in my apartment that evening, travel bag open, those memories played through me like a quiet accounting. I realized that the exhaustion I experienced was not merely physical. It was financial, emotional, moral. I was weary of being the solution to a problem I did not create, weary of being praised for my helpfulness while being drained behind the scenes, weary of pretending that my money was somehow less real than everyone else's comfort. I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about the coming week. If I stayed, I would spend thousands again. Not because Father requested it directly, but because he would decide and I would comply. I would resent him quietly, resent myself loudly, and then commence the cycle all over again next year. If I departed, the illusion would fracture. The thought frightened me. It also clarified everything. I finally named it for myself that evening. I was not simply being used for my labor. I was being used for my finances, and as long as I remained silent, it would never transform. I closed the travel bag and leaned back, allowing that truth to settle. It was uncomfortable, but it was honest. And for the first time in years, I did not push it away. That realization followed me as I extinguished the lights and got into bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. The house Father loved to display. The meals he claimed credit for. The wine he boasted about. None of it existed without my quiet payments. And I understood with a certainty that made my heart pound that if I did not cease now, I never would. I fell asleep that evening with my phone face down on the nightstand. Unanswered messages waiting, and a new understanding taking shape within me. I had spent years convincing myself that I was merely being helpful. Now I perceived it clearly. I was not only being used for my time, I was being used for my money as well. Once that truth settled in, I could no longer pretend I did not understand why I had said certainly to Father on the phone. It was not because I agreed with him. It was not because I possessed the time or the energy or the extra funds. It was because saying no had always felt more dangerous than saying yes. I lay in bed that evening staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the heating system cycling on and off. Every time it clicked, my mind jumped like I was bracing for another demand. I kept replaying that phone call in my head. The manner Father did not ask. The manner he announced. The manner my own voice came out calm and agreeable, betraying everything I was actually experiencing. I asked myself why I did that. Why, after everything I understood, after every credit card statement and quiet resentment, I still defaulted to compliance. The answer was not flattering, but it was honest. I was afraid of how I would be perceived. In our family, generosity was treated like a moral requirement. If you questioned it, you were selfish. If you inquired about finances, you were miserly. Father had instilled that in me without ever stating it explicitly. Anytime I attempted to discuss budgets or limits, he shut it down with a familiar response. He said I was making it about money when it was about family. He said family should not keep tallies. What he never acknowledged was that someone was always keeping tallies. It was just me. I remembered the first time I ever asked him about costs. It was a few years back after the holidays when I was feeling especially stretched. I had worked overtime leading up to the season, then spent my days off cooking and cleaning at his residence. I was exhausted, and the fatigue made me bolder than usual. I told him the holidays had become expensive. I said it carefully, like I was testing thin ice. He laughed, not cruelly, but dismissively. He told me not to be cheap. He said it was family. The conversation ended there, not because the issue was resolved, but because I retreated. I always retreated. Father possessed a way of making you feel diminished for questioning him. Even when he did it gently, he did not yell. He did not threaten. He simply framed things in a manner that made you doubt yourself. If you pushed back, you felt as though you were failing some unspoken test of loyalty. I understood that if I refused to finance this holiday, the story would circulate quickly. Marlo would become the daughter who abandoned her father during the season, the one who made things uncomfortable, the one who cared more about finances than family. No one would mention the fact that Father invited 30 people without inquiring who would pay. No one would mention that he expected a sophisticated event without contributing financially. They would merely observe the absence and assume it meant I did not care. That fear had kept me compliant for years. I rose from bed and walked into the living room where my laptop sat closed on the coffee table. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that allows your thoughts to grow louder. I opened the laptop, and logged into my email, then into my bank account. I did not do it to punish myself. I did it because I needed to perceive it clearly. Page after page displayed the same pattern. December spikes, grocery stores, specialty shops, liquor stores, charges that aligned perfectly with every holiday I had helped host. I scrolled slowly, feeling my chest tighten with each familiar name. I did not calculate the total initially. I was not prepared. Instead, I examined the dates, the rhythm of it, how reliably my money departed my account for family events that were never framed as my responsibility, but always became my burden. When I finally performed the calculation, I felt my stomach drop. Over the years, I had spent tens of thousands of dollars making Father appear like a generous host. Money I could have saved, money I could have used to travel, to rest, to build a cushion for myself. Money I had handed over quietly, thinking it was the price of peace. I leaned back on the sofa and covered my face with my hands. For a moment, I felt something close to shame. Not because I had been generous, but because I had allowed myself to be taken for granted for so long. I thought about how often Father spoke about family values, about doing the right thing. He believed those things, I think. Or at least he believed them in a way that never required him to sacrifice anything himself. His values always seemed to cost me more than they cost him. That evening I also thought about Mother. She had handled money differently. She kept lists. She paid attention. She understood exactly what things cost, even when she chose to spend. I remembered her once telling me quietly that love did not mean ignoring reality. At the time, I did not understand what she meant. I understand now. The truth was, I said certainly because I had been trained to believe that my discomfort mattered less than everyone else's comfort, that my financial stress was a personal failure, not the result of unreasonable expectations. That maintaining peace was worth any price, as long as no one raised their voice. But lying there staring at the glow of my laptop screen, I realized something had shifted. I could no longer pretend I did not know the cost. I could no longer tell myself it was just this once, just one more holiday, just until things changed. Things would not change unless I did. My phone vibrated on the coffee table, pulling me out of my thoughts. A message from Father. He was asking if I could stop by over the weekend to commence planning. I stared at the notification without opening it. For the first time, I did not feel a rush of guilt. I felt clarity. If I went, I would pay. If I stayed, I would spend. Not just money, but energy and dignity. I would once again finance an experience that made me feel invisible. I closed the laptop and stood up, pacing the length of my living room. Each step felt deliberate, like I was walking through a decision instead of around it. I thought about my savings account, modest but hard-earned. I thought about the way my shoulders always ached by the end of December. I thought about the way I felt every January, promising myself I would do things differently next year. Next year had arrived. The decision to depart was not impulsive. It was not revenge. It was self-preservation. I was choosing to protect myself financially in a way I never had before. I returned to my bedroom and opened the travel bag fully this time. I folded clothes carefully, not in a rush, but with intention. Each item felt like a small reclaiming of control. I was not running away from my family. I was stepping away from a system that only functioned because I kept paying into it. As I packed, I imagined the alternative. Me standing at Father's counter, card in hand, while he discussed upgrades. Me nodding along, telling myself it was acceptable. The image made my chest tighten. I zipped the travel bag closed and sat on the bed, resting my hands on top of it. The fear was still present. I was not pretending otherwise. I understood there would be fallout, questions, accusations, silence from some people, and anger from others. But beneath that fear was something steadier. Resolve. I understood now why I had said certainly. It had been a reflex built from years of conditioning. But understanding that reflex meant I could finally choose differently. I picked up my phone and turned it face down on the nightstand. I did not respond to Father. Not yet. I needed the quiet. I needed the space to commit to this choice without being talked out of it. As I lay back down, travel bag packed and waiting, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the version of myself who thought endurance was identical to love. Relief that I was finally drawing a line that protected not just my time, but my future. Departing was no longer about making a statement. It was about refusing to finance my own disrespect. That realization settled over me like a blanket, heavy but grounding. And as I closed my eyes, I understood that when morning arrived, I would not unpack. I would follow through. Morning arrived quietly without drama. The sky outside my apartment window was pale and flat, the kind of winter light that makes everything feel honest. I showered, dressed, and moved through my routine as though I was preparing for a standard workday. Except my travel bag stood by the door, fully packed, waiting. Every time I glanced at it, my heart beat slightly faster. Not with panic, but with determination. I drove to Father's residence just after sunrise. The streets were mostly vacant, the holiday decorations still dark, inflatable figures slumped over as though they were sleeping. As I pulled into his driveway, I experienced the familiar tightening in my chest, the reflex that instructed me to brace myself, to prepare to perform. I drew a deep breath and reminded myself that this time I was not there to serve. The residence was quiet when I let myself in with my key. Father was still asleep upstairs. I could hear the faint sound of his snoring through the floorboards, steady and unbothered. For years, this residence had felt like a workplace during the holidays, a place where I clocked in the moment I walked through the door. Standing there that morning, coat still on, I perceived it differently. It was a stage configured for a production I was finally stepping out of. I commenced in the kitchen. The pantry door creaked when I opened it, revealing shelves filled with food I recognized because I had purchased every item. Cans of broth, boxes of pasta, specialty ingredients Father insisted on for his holiday menu. I took a moment to observe it all, not with anger, but with clarity. This was my labor, my money, my effort arranged neatly on shelves as though it belonged to the residents, not to me. I grabbed a few reusable bags from beneath the sink and began clearing it out. I worked methodically, placing items into bags, one shelf at a time. The sound of cans clinking together was loud in the quiet residence. Each noise felt like punctuation, marking the end of an expectation. I did not rush. I allowed myself to feel the weight of each bag as it filled. The flour I never used for myself, the imported olive oil Father preferred, the baking supplies I purchased every year because someone always requested dessert. It all went into the bags. The refrigerator was next. I opened it and felt a brief flicker of guilt, the old instinct to leave things behind so no one would be inconvenienced. I pushed that feeling aside. I removed the vegetables, the meats, and the cheeses. Items intended for a feast I was no longer hosting. I left behind only the basics Father would typically purchase for himself. Milk, eggs, a few leftovers. Sufficient for a single man who understood how to feed himself. When the refrigerator shelves were bare, I wiped them down. A habit so ingrained it almost made me laugh. Even now, I was cleaning up after myself. Some patterns die hard. I carried the bags out to my car and stacked them carefully in the trunk. The cold air bit at my cheeks and I welcomed it. It made me feel awake. Back inside, I moved to the living room. The holiday decorations were already partially out, boxes stacked near the corner, waiting for me to arrange them. I had purchased most of them over the years, one piece at a time. The table runners, the candles, the ornaments Father liked to display. I gathered them up and carried them to the spare bedroom, the one Father rarely utilized. I placed everything inside, then closed the door and locked it. The click of the lock was louder than I expected. Final. Next was the cleaning service. I stepped into the den where the sunlight was just beginning to filter through the curtains and pulled out my phone. The cleaning company number was saved in my contacts. I had hired them years ago when Father complained that the residence felt like too much for him to manage. I paid them twice monthly. Father claimed credit for how immaculate everything always appeared. I called and canceled. The woman on the line sounded apologetic, as though she thought something was wrong. I told her calmly that the service would no longer be needed. My voice did not shake. When I hung up, I felt a strange lightness, like setting down a bag I had been carrying without realizing how heavy it was. I walked through the residence one final time, checking rooms the way I habitually did before a holiday. This time, I was not searching for dust or clutter. I was ensuring I had not left behind anything of mine. A cookbook here, a serving platter there, little things that had accumulated over years of unpaid service. In the kitchen, I took a piece of paper from the drawer and sat at the table. My hands hovered over the page for a moment. I did not want to write something theatrical. I did not want to explain myself or argue my case. I had spent enough years explaining. I wrote a brief note, clear and simple. I stated I had decided to depart early for my trip. I stated I would not be cooking, cleaning, or serving. I stated the residence was in his hands. I wished him a flawless holiday. I did not mention finances. I did not list grievances. I did not justify my choice. The emptiness of the pantry and the silence of the residence would communicate everything that needed to be communicated. I folded the note once and placed it on the kitchen counter, precisely where Father would notice it when he came downstairs. Beside it, I left my spare key. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the residents breathe, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Upstairs, Father shifted in his sleep, unaware that the ground beneath his holiday plans had already moved. I picked up my coat and my bag, then walked out the front door, pulling it closed behind me. The sound of it shutting felt definitive, like the end of a sentence. As I loaded the final bag into my car, I took one last look at the residence. It had been my childhood home, then my obligation, then my quiet burden. That morning, it felt different. Neutral, merely a building, not a place that owned my time or my wallet anymore. I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. The heater blasted warm air, fogging up the windshield for a second before clearing. I backed out of the driveway slowly, half expecting the front door to open, for Father to call out my name. Nothing happened. The road ahead was vacant, stretching out in front of me, and for the first time in years, I did not feel like I was leaving something unfinished behind. I was departing without an invoice, without a receipt, without a list of things I still owed. As the residence disappeared in my rearview mirror, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. Not joy exactly, but relief, the kind that comes when you finally cease paying for a role you never applied for. I drove on, allowing the distance to grow, understanding that what I had done could not be undone, and strangely grateful for that. The first message from Father arrived less than an hour later. I was on the highway heading north, the radio low, my hand steady on the wheel. My phone vibrated against the passenger seat, and I understood it was him before I looked. I did not answer. I did not even pick it up. I kept my eyes on the road and focused on the sensation in my chest. That strange mixture of fear and calm that arrives right after you finally do something you have been postponing for years. When I stopped for fuel, I checked my phone. Several missed calls. A string of messages stacked one on top of the other. The initial ones were sharp, brief, accusatory. He inquired where I was. He said this was absurd. He said I was being theatrical. He reminded me that family was counting on me. I read them slowly, noticing how familiar the tone was. This was the voice I had heard every time I stepped out of line. Not cruel exactly, but disappointed in a manner that always landed like a judgment. I did not respond. As the hours passed, the messages changed. The edge softened. The anger gave way to something else. Confusion, perhaps. Or the dawning realization that the machinery was not going to run without me. Later that afternoon, another message came through. This one was longer. He inquired what he was supposed to do. He stated people were arriving. He said things were already in motion. What he did not inquire was how much I had spent. He did not ask what it had cost me over the years. He did not ask if I was exhausted. The question was not about finances. It was about logistics, about inconvenience. I stared at the screen while standing in line at the gas station, the smell of fuel thick in the air. People moved around me, laughing, conversing, living their lives. I felt as though I was observing the world through glass. What am I supposed to do? I almost laughed, not because it was humorous, but because it was revealing. For years, I had asked myself that same question while scrubbing pans or swiping my card at the store. What am I supposed to do? How do I make this function without upsetting anyone? How do I carry this without complaining? Now the question belonged to him. I did not answer. That evening, I checked into a modest hotel a few hours away. Nothing elaborate, clean, quiet, the kind of place where no one expects you to perform. I sat on the edge of the bed and removed my shoes, feeling the ache in my feet catch up to me. It was the first time all day I permitted myself to cease moving. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was not Father. It was my Aunt Vivienne. She commenced gently. She always did. She inquired where I was. She stated Father was upset. She said people were concerned. I could almost hear her voice, low and careful, as though she was attempting not to startle me. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. She informed me Father had already purchased expensive wine. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headboard. Of course he had. Of course. Even after I departed, even after the pantry was empty and the decorations locked away, he continued doing what he always did. He made decisions without a plan and assumed someone else would absorb the cost. She suggested I come back, merely to smooth things over, merely to help him out. She stated it would not be the same without me. I listened. I allowed her to talk. I did not interrupt. Inside, something settled into place. Father had not learned anything yet. He was still operating under the same assumption, that I would surrender, that I would return embarrassed, ready to repair things, that my departure was a tantrum, not a boundary. I told my aunt calmly that I was not coming back. I said it once clearly without explanation. There was a pause on the line, the kind that fills with unspoken disappointment. She sighed and said she understood, though I could tell she did not. She stated Father was not proficient with this type of thing. She stated he needed help. I thanked her for calling and ended the conversation. I sat there in the quiet hotel room, my phone resting face down on the nightstand, and allowed the silence to stretch. It felt different from the silence I was accustomed to. This one did not feel like avoidance. It felt like space. Later that evening, another message from Father came through. The tone had shifted again, less angry, more unsettled. He inquired if I could at least talk. He said he did not know where anything was. He asked what people would think. What people would think. That question followed me into the night. I lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of other guests through the walls. Someone laughed down the hall. A door closed. Life continued. I thought about all the times I had done things for the sake of appearances, all the energy I had expended managing perceptions, ensuring no one noticed the strain behind the scenes. I realized how deeply that instinct was rooted in me and how uncomfortable it felt to resist it. But I also realized something else. For the first time, the consequences were not landing on me. They were landing where they belonged. The next morning, I woke up early, my body still on its old schedule. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered, and my chest tightened, then loosened again. I checked my phone. More messages. Father asked again what he was supposed to do. He said he did not sleep well. He stated this was not like me. He said family mattered. Still no mention of cost, no acknowledgement of the money he had already spent or expected me to spend. Just urgency. Just pressure. Another call came in from a cousin I had not spoken to in months. She inquired if everything was all right. She mentioned that Father seemed stressed. She stated she heard I departed. The word departed hung between us, heavy with implication. I told her I needed some time. I did not explain further. I did not defend myself. I was finished narrating my choices for other people's comfort. As the day went on, the pattern continued. Messages, calls, concern mixed with frustration. No one accused me outright, but I could sense the unspoken question hovering in every interaction. Why would you do this? Now? I wanted to tell them that now was the only time it made sense, that waiting until after the holiday would merely reset the cycle, that doing it quietly had gotten me nowhere, that departing was not abandonment, but self-respect. I told none of them that. In the afternoon, I went for a long walk. The air was cold and sharp, and my breath emerged in white clouds. I allowed my phone to sit in my pocket unanswered. Each step felt like a small act of defiance against the version of myself that always rushed back to repair things. I thought about Father alone in his residence, pacing, opening cabinets, realizing how much he did not know how to do. I did not feel satisfaction exactly. I felt clarity. This was not punishment. It was exposure. That evening, the messages slowed. The silence between them grew longer. I could sense the shift. The moment where panic transforms into problem-solving, where people cease demanding and commence adapting. I ate dinner alone at a small restaurant near the hotel. The food was simple, warm. I paid the bill without thinking twice, and the irony did not escape me. This time, the money I spent was for me. Back in my room, I checked my phone one final time. A final message from Father sat there unread. I did not open it. I did not need to. I placed the phone on the nightstand and extinguished the light. The room went dark, quiet, still. For the first time since I departed, I felt the full weight of my choice settle in. I was not going back. Whatever happened next, whatever stories were told, whatever discomfort unfolded in that residence, I would not be there to smooth it over. The storm was approaching, and I was no longer standing in its path. The next morning, the first sign that the storm had shifted from possibility to reality came from my cousin Sterling. He was not someone who texted often. Sterling was the type who appeared, ate, made polite conversation, and departed without getting entangled in anyone else's drama. So, when his name appeared on my screen before I even finished my hotel coffee, my stomach tightened. His message was brief and blunt. People are arriving early. Some changed flights. Father looks panicked. I read it twice, then set my phone down as though it had weight. Early meant unplanned. Early meant there would be no grace period for Father to pretend he had things under control. Early meant the residence would be what it was. Empty pantry, locked decorations, no trays of food waiting in the refrigerator, no calm daughter in the kitchen smoothing everything over. Early meant the illusion would collapse in daylight with witnesses. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and attempted to breathe normally. I told myself I was safe. I was not in danger. This was not life or death, but my body had been trained to react to family crises like an alarm. My chest felt tight. My hands felt restless. A part of me wanted to jump up, throw on my coat, and rush back as I always did. Instead, I forced myself to remain still. I picked up my phone and typed back to Sterling. "Are you there now?" He replied quickly. "Just pulled up. There are cars everywhere." I could picture it. Father's driveway packed. People stepping out with suitcases and garment bags. The kind of arrival energy that fills a residence with expectation. I could hear the imagined sounds. Car doors slamming, voices calling out greetings, shoes stomping snow off boots, the warmth of reunion, the easy assumption that someone inside had been preparing for them. Someone kept asking where you are. I closed my eyes. I had understood this would happen. I had planned for it. But understanding something intellectually and hearing it described in real time are two different things. My throat tightened with a mixture of fear and something else. Something steadier. Relief. Because it was happening without me. The moment I always attempted to prevent was unfolding exactly as it needed to. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Vivienne again. I allowed it to ring once, twice, 3 times, then answered because I could tell from the timing that she was calling from inside the fire. Her voice came through loud and strained, as though she was attempting to keep it together while speaking through clenched teeth. She did not say hello. "Marlo, where are you?" I told her calmly that I was out of town. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "Do you have any idea what is happening here?" I could hear noise behind her, voices overlapping, someone laughing too loudly, someone asking a question, the sound of suitcases rolling across the hard floor. It made my stomach flip. Vivian lowered her voice. People are here. They arrived early. They are walking in, and there is nothing. No food, no tree, nothing. Your father is upstairs changing his shirt like that is going to repair it. I pictured father doing exactly that, fussing over the wrong details, as though if he appeared polished enough, reality would cooperate. Vivian continued, and her tone shifted from panic to frustration. He keeps saying you are overreacting, that you stormed off. He says you got sensitive about the holiday planning. Overreacting, sensitive, stormed off. The old story, the easy story. The story that made him the reasonable one and me the unstable one. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but my voice remained steady. Did he tell them he invited 30 people without asking who would pay? Vivian paused. She did not answer directly, which was its own answer. He states you love hosting, she said finally. He says you always take charge. He says he did not think it would be a problem. Of course he did. For years, father had been narrating my labor as a personality trait, as though my willingness was an inherent characteristic, not a decision. I could hear someone call Vivian's name in the background, then a muffled response. She returned to me, voice tight. Beatrice is here. She just walked in and looked around like she could not believe it. Beatrice, my aunt by marriage. Technically, she worked as a human resources consultant, the kind of woman who could sit in a conference room with executives twice her size and make them squirm with one calm question. Beatrice did not get loud. She did not do theatrics. She did accountability. Just hearing her name made my pulse jump. Vivian whispered, "She is asking questions." I inquired, "What kind of questions?" Vivian hesitated, then said, "The kind that makes your father stutter." Before I could respond, Vivian suddenly lowered her voice even more. "Marlo, please just come back, even for a few hours. We can repair this. People are hungry. They are confused. This is turning into a whole situation." A whole situation. That phrase used to terrify me. It meant conflict. It meant raised voices. It meant people taking sides. It meant gossip that lasted for years. This time it meant the truth. I swallowed and said, "I am not coming back." Vivian went quiet. In the silence, I could hear someone in the background asking where the appetizers were. Someone else inquired about dinner plans. The sound of a refrigerator door opening and closing. A cupboard slamming. Then Vivian spoke again, softer now. "He is embarrassed." I said he should be. That was the first time I had ever said something like that out loud. I expected my voice to tremble, but it did not. It came out calm, like a fact. Vivian exhaled as though she had been holding her breath. "I have to go," she said. "I just needed to know if you were actually coming." I told her no again, gently, and ended the call. I sat there staring at the wall for a moment, my coffee cooling on the little hotel table. My hands shook slightly, not from guilt, but from the adrenaline of finally refusing to rescue everyone. My phone vibrated with a new text, this time from Sterling. "Father is trying to act normal. He keeps offering people water, like that counts as hosting." I almost smiled despite myself. Then another message came through. "He says you are being theatrical, that you will cool off and show up later." There it was, the assumption. Even now, even in the middle of the mess, he still believed my boundary was temporary. He still believed my no was a mood, not a decision. I drew a slow breath and reminded myself of the pantry shelves I had cleared, the lock clicking on the spare bedroom door, the cleaning service cancellation. Those were not theatrical gestures. They were practical. They were final. A little later, I got a message from someone else, my cousin Cordelia, who only reached out when she needed something. Her text was loaded with false concern. "Are you all right? Father says you got upset over nothing." Over nothing. I stared at that phrase until my jaw tightened. I did not respond. Then unexpectedly, Beatrice called me. I hesitated. Beatrice and I were not close, but she was sharp, and I did not want to be on the wrong end of her conclusions. Still, something in me wanted to hear her voice. I wanted to know what she observed when she walked into the scene I had stepped away from. I answered, Beatrice did not waste time. "Marlo, are you safe?" "Yes," I said. "Good. Then tell me one thing," she said, calm as ever. "Did you tell your father you were not doing this?" I drew a breath. "I told him I would not be there. I told him I was going on a trip. I left him a note." Beatrice paused, and he still invited everyone. "Yes." Another pause. The kind of pause that feels like someone taking notes in their head. I could hear voices behind her, muffled but tense. Then Beatrice spoke again, still calm. "Your father is telling people you are overreacting. He is saying you walked out in a huff because he asked you to help." I felt my face warm with anger. He did not ask. Beatrice's tone remained even. "I figured that. That is why I'm calling. Because I am standing in your father's kitchen and there is no food, and there are no decorations, and people are looking around like someone died." I swallowed hard. I did not know what to say to that. Beatrice continued. "I want to understand something before I say what I am thinking out loud. Who usually pays for all of this?" The question landed like a bell ringing in a quiet room. Who usually pays? Not who cooks, not who cleans. Who pays? My throat tightened. I told the truth. "I do." Beatrice made a soft sound like her suspicion had been confirmed. "That is what I thought." She did not accuse. She did not gasp. She simply absorbed it, the way she probably absorbed uncomfortable truths all day in her profession. I added carefully that I am not wealthy. I just never wanted it to be a fight. Beatrice's voice softened slightly. "I know. That is usually who gets stuck carrying things. The person who despises conflict." I closed my eyes because that sentence felt like someone had seen me clearly for the first time in years. In the background, someone asked Beatrice where the wine was. She answered them without covering the phone, telling them to give her a minute. Then she returned to me. "Marlo," she said, "did your father contribute financially this year or any year?" I released a short breath. "Not really. He purchases a few basics, but the substantial things, the special things, the sophisticated things, that has been me." Beatrice went quiet for a moment. I could almost hear her organizing the information, turning it into a simple, undeniable pattern. Then she said, "I am going to ask him this in front of people." My heart jumped. "Beatrice, you do not have to." "I do," she replied, "because he is making you the problem. And I am not going to allow him to rewrite reality just because it is uncomfortable." The words struck me hard, not because they were theatrical, but because they were true. For years, Father had been rewriting reality, taking my effort and making it appear as though it belonged to him, taking my money and making it seem like it did not exist, taking my compliance and pretending it was enthusiasm. Beatrice continued, still steady. "I am not telling you to come back. I am telling you to stay where you are. Let this play out. Let the people who benefited from your silence sit in discomfort for once." I felt my eyes sting, and I blinked quickly. "Thank you," I said, and my voice cracked slightly. Beatrice did not make a significant deal of it. She simply said, "You should not have had to do this alone for so long." Then she hung up. I sat there in the hotel room, my phone in my hand, feeling as though the air had changed. Something important had happened, and it had nothing to do with food or decorations. For the first time, someone had named the financial part out loud. Someone had asked the question I had been too polite, too fearful, too conditioned to ask. Who usually pays for all of this? Back at Father's residence, that question would not remain private. It would spread across the room, changing the way people looked at the tables, the empty counters, the lack of effort. It would shift blame away from my absence and toward the expectations that created the absence in the first place. My phone vibrated again. A text from Sterling. Beatrice just asked him about money. He looked like he swallowed a rock. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Then another message. People got quiet, really quiet. I set my phone down slowly and looked out the window. The parking lot outside the hotel was ordinary. A few cars, a woman walking a dog. Nothing theatrical. Yet in my mind, I could see Father's living room. The relatives gathered, the air changing. For the first time, money was not something I carried in silence. It was on the table, right next to the missing dinner, right next to the empty pantry, right next to the truth no one could unsee. I did not hear what happened next directly. I was not in the room. But over the next few hours, my phone became a quiet window into what unfolded. Message by message, voice by voice, as the family I had spent years holding together finally stopped pretending. The first update came from Sterling again. Brief sentences clipped like he was typing while standing in a corner, watching something uncomfortable but important. Beatrice did not let it go. Then a few minutes later, she asked him straight out, "Who paid for past holidays?" I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the carpet as though it might move if I looked long enough. My heart was pounding, not with fear this time, but with something closer to awe. This was actually happening. The question I had swallowed year after year was being spoken out loud in front of everyone. Another message came through, this one longer. Vivienne spoke up. I could picture Vivienne clearly. She was not confrontational by nature. She liked harmony. She liked smooth edges. For her to speak meant the ground had shifted enough that silence felt worse than conflict. Later that evening, Vivienne called me. Her voice sounded tired, as though she had aged a few years in one afternoon. She did not commence with pleasantries. "Marlo," she said. This turned into something I did not expect. I asked her, "What happened?" She drew a breath. Beatrice asked who paid. "Your father tried to evade it. He said things like, 'We all contribute, and it works out.'" And then she asked again, more directly. I closed my eyes, and Vivienne hesitated. "And I said your name." My chest tightened. "I said that you did not just cook and clean. You paid over and over. I said I had seen you swipe your card. I said I had never once seen your father reimburse you." Hearing that made something crack open inside me. Not because it hurt, but because it felt like release, like a weight finally being set down. Vivienne continued. "After that, other people started talking. Remember the holiday with the seafood spread? Someone remembered the year with the fancy desserts. Another person mentioned the wine that was always boasted about. I could hear it now in my mind. The room replaying old scenes with new eyes. Moments that had once felt festive now being re-examined as transactions. Effort, cost, sacrifice. Vivienne said, "Someone asked why you always looked exhausted at the end of the night. Someone else said they thought you just liked being busy." I laughed quietly at that. A sound with no humor in it. Busy. That word had been used to erase my labor for years. Then Vivienne told me about the moment that changed everything. Beatrice said something that made the room go completely still. I leaned forward. What did she say? She said, "Generosity is not an obligation." The words landed heavy, even through the phone. Generosity is not an obligation. Simple, clear, impossible to argue with. Vivienne said, after that, no one really knew what to say. It was as though everyone realized at the same time that they had been benefiting from something they never acknowledged. I imagined Father sitting there, surrounded by people he wanted to impress, suddenly stripped of the narrative that had always protected him. No shouting, no accusations, merely a quiet, undeniable truth settling into the room. I asked Vivienne what Father did. She paused for a long moment. He did not say much. He did not deny it. He just went quiet. That told me everything. Father was not someone who stayed quiet when he believed he was right. His silence was not humility, but exposure. There was nothing he could say without making it worse. No way to explain away years of assumption and entitlement once the money was named. Vivienne sighed. He looked small. "Marlo, I do not mean weak. I mean cornered, like the story he always told himself stopped working." I felt a strange ache in my chest. Not triumph, not pity exactly. Something more complicated. Father was still my father. I did not want him humiliated. I just wanted him to stop. Vivienne went on. "Someone said maybe we should have been helping more. Someone else asked why everything always fell on you. It got uncomfortable. Good. I thought it should have been uncomfortable years ago." Later that evening, another call came in. This time from my cousin Cordelia. Her tone was very different from before. Less polished, less defensive. She said, "I never realized you were paying for all of that. I thought Father was handling it. I am sorry." I thanked her, not because the apology repaired anything, but because it mattered that it was said. Then Sterling texted again. Father went upstairs. He said he needed air. I pictured him standing alone in his bedroom, the noise of the residents muffled below, finally confronted with the reality that the comfort he enjoyed had come at cost to someone else. To me, I did not feel victorious. What I felt was grounded, as though the truth had finally reached the surface and could not be pushed back down. The next message came later, after things had settled into an uneasy quiet. People ordered pizza. I smiled softly at that. Pizza. Paper plates. No fanfare, no performance, merely food to get through the evening, Sterling added. It is weirdly calmer now. That made sense. Once the illusion fractured, there was nothing left to maintain. No one is scrambling to keep up appearances. No one is silently resentful in the kitchen. Vivian called me one final time before bed. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that what you did not ruin anything. It exposed something that needed to be seen." I thanked her, my voice thick. After we hung up, I sat alone in the quiet hotel room, the lights dim, the city humming faintly outside the window. I thought about all the times I had imagined standing up for myself and felt sick with fear, all the ways I believed it would explode into chaos. Instead, it unfolded slowly, awkwardly, honestly. Father's authority in that room did not collapse because someone yelled at him. It collapsed because the truth was finally spoken in plain language, without anger, without drama. He had relied on my silence to keep his image intact. Without it, there was nothing left to stand on. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling the exhaustion catch up to me, but also something else, something like peace. For the first time, the burden was not mine alone. The story had changed, and there was no going back. The next morning, the holiday arrived quietly for me. No alarms, no grocery lists taped to the refrigerator, no voice calling my name from another room asking where something was. I woke up in the hotel bed wrapped in clean white sheets, the kind that did not smell like burnt food or stress. For a moment, I did not remember where I was. And then I did, and my body relaxed all at once. I made coffee using the little machine by the window and stood there watching the city wake up. Somewhere across town, my family was gathering. Somewhere else, traditions were rearranging themselves without me holding them in place. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. A message from Sterling. "The holiday is different." That was all it said. I smiled faintly and took a sip of coffee. Different did not mean ruined. It meant altered. And sometimes altered was better. A little later, another message came in. This time from Vivian. "We are eating pizza. Paper plates. Someone forgot napkins, so we are using paper towels." I could picture it perfectly. The long dining table stripped of its usual drama. No carefully arranged place settings. No centerpieces. No wine bottles lined up like trophies. Just boxes stacked in the middle. Grease soaking through cardboard. People grabbing slices and sitting wherever there was space. Vivian added, "No one seems upset about it." That was the part that made my chest tighten. For years, Father had insisted that everything had to be flawless, that the food had to be impressive, that appearances mattered. He had framed it as hospitality, as pride. But without my labor and my wallet smoothing every edge, something interesting had happened. The expectations evaporated. Sterling sent a photo. I did not ask for it, but he sent it anyway. I opened it slowly. The living room looked smaller somehow. Folding chairs pulled up where they fit. Children sitting cross-legged on the floor. A couple of cousins leaning against the counter. No one dressed up. No one performed. Someone was laughing in the background. I stared at that photo longer than I meant to. Another message came in from Cordelia. "Honestly, this is kind of nice. Less pressure. Less pressure." That phrase echoed in my mind. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Vivian again. Her voice sounded lighter than it had the evening before. "People are actually talking," she said. "Not just complimenting the food or asking where you got things. Just talking." I asked her how Father was doing. She paused. "He is quieter than usual, but he is not angry. Just watching." Watching what? I wondered. Watching a version of the holiday that did not revolve around him being admired. Watching a gathering that did not require someone else to carry the weight. Vivian continued. "Someone said something interesting earlier." "What?" "They said, 'We do not need fancy food to be together.' We never did." I closed my eyes. That sentence landed deeper than anything else because it confirmed what I had suspected for years, but never permitted myself to believe. The extravagance was never for the family. It was for Father, for his image, for his comfort, for his sense of control. Without me paying for it, without me executing it, the illusion dropped, and no one missed it. The rest of my holiday passed quietly. I took a long walk. I ate takeout I chose myself. I read. I rested. I did things without timing them around other people's needs. In the evening, Sterling called. He sounded tired, but calm. "I just wanted you to know," he said. "This is not falling apart. It is just simpler. Simpler." The word felt like a gift. He added, "Father has not complained once today. Not about the food, not about the setup." That surprised me more than anything. Perhaps because complaining would require admitting he expected more. Admitting that more usually came from me. When the call ended, I sat back and allowed the quiet to fill the room. Somewhere inside, a long-held belief finally loosened its grip. I had believed that without my effort things would collapse, that I was the adhesive, the only one holding the family together. But the holiday had come and gone, and the world had not ended. What disappeared was not love, not connection. What disappeared was excess, and with it, the unspoken rule that I was responsible for everyone else's comfort. As night fell, I realized something else. The perfection Father demanded had never been a family value. It was a personal standard he outsourced to me. Without my money, without my labor, that standard no longer existed, and no one asked for it back. I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet, understanding the next conversation with Father would be different, because something fundamental had already changed. The story we had all been telling ourselves no longer made sense, and that truth, once seen, could not be unseen. I stayed one more night at the hotel, not because I was hiding, but because I needed to allow the new reality to settle before I stepped back into the old one. I understood if I went back too fast, I would fall into my usual role out of habit. I would commence repairing things without thinking. I would apologize for other people's discomfort. I would smooth edges that did not belong to me. So, I took my time. The morning after the holiday, I woke up early and drove back toward Portland with the radio off. The roads were quiet, lined with salt stains and leftover festive lights. My mind kept drifting to the image Sterling sent. Everyone eating pizza, laughing, sitting wherever there was space. The simplicity of it had felt like a lesson I was still learning. When I pulled into Father's driveway, my stomach tightened anyway. Muscle memory does not disappear overnight. That residence still held years of expectation, and I could feel my body preparing to step back into the version of me that kept things running. I sat in my car for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. Then I got out and walked to the front door. Father opened it before I could knock. He looked different than he had on the phone. Not angry, not theatrical, just tired. His hair was a little messier than usual, and his eyes had that bruised appearance people get after a long day of pretending. He stepped aside to let me in. The residence smelled faintly like stale pizza and coffee. Not unpleasant, just real. The living room had signs of people being there, a couple of paper plates in the trash, coats draped over a chair, a folded blanket on the sofa. It felt lived in, not staged. Father cleared his throat as though he was about to commence with a complaint, then stopped. He just said, "You are back." I nodded. "I am back." There was a pause. We stood there observing each other, both aware that we were not merely talking about my physical presence. We were talking about what had changed. He gestured toward the kitchen, and I followed him in. The counters were bare. No serving trays, no fancy leftovers packed neatly in containers, no evidence of a feast that took days to prepare. It looked like a normal kitchen after a normal holiday, not a performance. Father picked up the coffee pot and poured himself a cup, then glanced at me as though asking whether I wanted one. For years, I would have automatically said yes, then gotten up to make it myself. This time I said no thank you, and remained seated. That small moment mattered more than it should have. Father sat across from me at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around his mug. His shoulders slumped slightly, as though he had been holding them up on purpose and finally got tired. He spoke first. It got out of hand, he said. I waited. I did not fill the silence. I did not rescue him with excuses. He drew a breath. People came early. I did not expect that. I did not have a plan. I nodded once. Father looked down at his coffee, then back up. Beatrice made it sound like I have been taking advantage of you. The words were careful. Not a confession, not an apology, but an acknowledgement that the accusation existed. I said quietly, Father, you have. His jaw tightened for a second. He looked as though he wanted to push back, then stopped himself. I did not think about it like that, he said. I just got used to you handling things. There it was. Not malice, habit. Entitlement wrapped in familiarity. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, but I kept my voice steady. Getting used to it does not make it fair. Father exhaled through his nose, and for a moment he looked older than I remembered. He stared past me at the empty counter, as though he could see all the meals that used to appear there without him understanding how. I did not think about the cost, he said finally. I knew it cost money, but I did not. I did not put it together. I did not realize how much. He sounded embarrassed saying that, as though admitting ignorance was humiliating. I almost softened out of instinct, the old reflex that tells you to make your parents feel better. But I stopped myself. Comforting him would slide us right back into the same pattern where I manage his feelings, and he learns nothing. So, I told him the truth. I paid for more than you know, Father. I paid because you asked for things to be sophisticated. You wanted it upscale. You wanted people impressed. And every time I tried to bring up a budget, you told me not to be cheap. Father's eyes flicked away, then back. He did not deny it. I could feel the air in the room change. Not tense in an explosive manner, tense in a real manner, like a wound being cleaned. It stings, but it is necessary. He swallowed. I should not have said that. I allowed that to sit. It was the closest thing to an apology he had offered so far. Then he said, I did not know you were keeping track. That struck me in a strange way, not because it was offensive, but because it revealed how he saw me as someone who could absorb and forget, as someone whose generosity reset every year like a blank page. I answered gently, but firmly. I was not keeping track to throw it in your face. I was keeping track because it was my life. It was my money, and I kept hoping it would stop feeling like a burden. Father stared at his mug for a long moment. The silence stretched. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the residence. It reminded me of all the silent hours I spent preparing food while everyone else talked in the other room. Father cleared his throat again. Vivian told me you canceled the cleaning service. Yes, I said. He looked up, surprised by my directness, as though he expected me to justify it. I did not. He nodded slowly. I guess I did not realize you were paying for that either. I did not say I told you so. I did not say you should have noticed. I simply said I was paying for a lot of things, Father. He rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand, a gesture I remembered from my childhood, usually reserved for moments when he felt overwhelmed. Back then, Mother would step in and smooth things over. Now Mother was gone, and Father was facing a discomfort he could no longer hand off to someone else. He looked at me, and his voice was careful. So, if we do something next year, we talk about it first. Yes, I said. We talk about it first. And we talk about finances first too, not after. He nodded again, slower this time. In that nod, I felt the shift of control. Not a power grab, not revenge, just balance returning to a relationship that had tilted for too long. Father looked tired, but he did not look defensive anymore. He looked like someone who had run out of shortcuts and finally saw the work behind what he used to take for granted. He cleared his throat. "Are you staying for dinner tonight?" I paused, not because I did not know what I wanted, but because I wanted to choose it consciously. I said, "I can stay for a little while, but I am not cooking." Father gave a small, reluctant smile, the first sign of something lighter. "We can order something," he said. I nodded. "That works." We sat there for a moment longer, the kitchen quiet, the air still carrying the scent of coffee and yesterday's ordinary holiday. It was not flawless. It was not upscale. It was not staged. It was real. That was the word that stayed with me after I departed Father's residence that evening. Real. Not flawless, not impressive, not staged for approval, merely real. And for the first time, I realized that was the surprise Father would never forget. The weeks after the holiday passed quietly. No dramatic fallout, no shouting phone calls, no guilt-laden messages asking me to repair something. The silence was different this time. It was not heavy. It was respectful. Father did not ask me to reimburse anything. He did not mention the cost of the pizza or the paper towels or the awkwardness of that day. He did not bring up finances at all, and that told me more than any apology could have. In January, he called to ask how work was going, not to ask what I was cooking next, not to ask if I could help with something, merely to ask how I was. That conversation alone felt like proof that something had shifted. Spring arrived and went. Birthdays passed. Family gatherings happened in smaller, quieter ways. Sometimes Father hosted. Sometimes someone else did. And every time there was a conversation beforehand. What is the plan? What is the budget? Who is bringing what? Simple questions that somehow had never been asked before. The first time Father asked me directly how much I wanted to contribute, I almost laughed. Not because it was humorous, but because it was so unfamiliar. I told him what I was comfortable with. He said, "All right." And that was it. No pushing, no comments about being cheap, no expectations layered with obligation. That was the real surprise. By the time the next holiday season arrived, there were fewer people, fewer decorations. The menu was simpler. There was no expensive wine, no upscale demands, no last-minute grocery runs that left me exhausted and resentful. Costs were split. Food was shared. No one directed anyone else around. Father cooked one dish himself. I watched him in the kitchen, moving slower than I remembered, reading instructions off his phone, asking questions without embarrassment. I helped when I wanted to. I stepped back when I did not, and no one assumed anything. That holiday did not sparkle the way the old ones did. It did not impress anyone on the outside. But something else happened instead. People stayed longer at the table. They talked more. They laughed without glancing toward the kitchen. I noticed Father watching me once, not with expectation, but with something closer to awareness, as though he was seeing me as a person in the room, not the infrastructure holding it together. Later that evening, he said quietly, "This feels different." I nodded. "It is." He did not argue. That was when I understood the truth that had taken me years to learn. Walking away was not revenge. Silence was not the punishment. The real change happened because I removed my money, my labor, and my automatic yes, and everything rearranged itself around that absence. Father never forgot that holiday, not because it fell apart, but because it showed him something he could not unsee, that the luxury he demanded had always been subsidized by my silence, that generosity is not an obligation, and that love does not come with an invoice attached. As for me, I changed too. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could give. I stopped confusing peacekeeping with love. I learned that financial boundaries are not cold or selfish. They are necessary, just like emotional ones. I still show up for my family. I still care. I still help. But I do it with consent now. Not pressure. With clarity. Not fear. And that has made all the difference. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest response. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening.